fellow travelers, and welcome to the First Stars podcast. How are my loyal listeners? Thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is a special episode because aboard the mothership is the legendary Tom Cook. He's the animator of cartoons like He-Man, She-Ra, and Bravestar. Now come on board as we go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Cook. Thank you so much for coming to the Traversing Stars podcast.
Hey, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
It's a sincere honor to speak with you, sir. You did the animation for the majority of our childhood, so I want to thank you so much.
Hey, it was my pleasure. Believe me, they paid me for it, so it was good.
Well, the legacy endures, which is I think the phenomenal part. So I always start off with the question of inspiration. So what inspired your love of animation, and who are your earliest influences?
Yeah, let's see. I always loved cartoons because as a kid, I guess I was about 7 or 8 years old when Saturday morning cartoons first started. And so I got caught up in that, just watching the cartoons every Saturday and that sort of thing. Prior to that, it was the Disney movies and stuff like that. I saw a lot of, it feels really weird to have seen Peter Pan first run at the theater, and Sleeping Beauty and Pinocchio and some of those other ones. But so I really loved animation, but really my first love back when I was a kid was comic books. And I used to collect a lot of comic books, Superman, Batman, all the good DC stuff. And then one day my next door neighbor and I were like camping out back in the tent in the backyard. And we'd sit there with our flashlights reading comic books. And he pulls out this comic book that I'd never seen before called Spider-Man. And I was like, oh my gosh, what is that? And that really started me to want to draw, because I loved the way Steve Ditko made Spider-Man look so spidery. And it was different than Batman and Superman, where they were so strong. And here's this gangly kid, that was really kind of quiet and shy, and that's kind of what I was. So I really connected with Spider-Man, and that's really what got me started drawing. And it was just kind of by accident that I ended up in the animation field, and I'm sure we'll get to that at some point. But really, that was my main inspiration. And luckily, I got to tell Steve Ditko in person that he had inspired me, and it was really nice. He shook my hand and said, I had people that inspired me when I was a kid, and it's really nice to know that I inspired you. So that was cool. And then with Jack Kirby, I got to meet him because I worked with him on Thundar the Barbarian. And, to be able to meet your hero is one thing, but then to work in the same building as him is like a whole new ball game. And I didn't even know he was working there until I saw him walking across the bridge one day. And went over and introduced myself to him, and he gave me his address and phone number and said, come on over to the house.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So what was Jack Kirby doing on Thunder the Barbarian? Was he the writer, or was he doing part of the animation?
No, Steve Gerber and he kind of came up with the concept. And Steve Gerber, of course, did Howard the Duck. And he was doing a lot of the character designs, where if you look at some of the bad guys in Thundar, they look straight out of the Fourth World. The Gemini, which this guy that had this helmet that would spin around, they have a different face on the back. It was pure Kirby. And I even have a model sheet of Thundar where the hand is showing you how the sun sword connects to his forearm. And it's Jack Kirby's art, obviously, because the fingers are the Jack Kirby fingers, And and that was kind of my favorite show anyway, the Thundar, because it was a little bit more for older kids and a little bit more, post-apocalyptic and all that sort of stuff. So it was pretty cool show.
So I read that you attended Pierce College. So what was your area of study at Pierce?
My area of study at Pierce was geography, and only because I didn't know what else to take. I wanted to go to college and get at least my bachelor's or whatever. And, we had to pick something, and I just picked geography because, I like geography fine, but it certainly wasn't anywhere that you can go with a job. What, map maker? you know but I enjoyed it enough that I could pass it and do well in the class. And I was also very sports minded, and there was a a badminton team, which badminton is not very popular here in the U.S., but over in Europe and the Asia, it's super popular. And I took a class just because I needed a PE class, and everything else was booked. So I took this badminton class, and the teacher, after the class was over at the end of the year, she said, we have a badminton team and you're really good. You could do really well on this team if you're interested. And I thought, well, I did. I had a really good time. It's not the game that you think of in the backyard with the little hitting it really soft. This is really, really fast game. The bird goes like 200 miles an hour when you're really smacking it.
Oh, shit.
And of course, unlike tennis, it can't hit the ground. So you have to run and make sure it doesn't hit the ground. So anyway, I ended up doing that for a couple of years, and I was the California state champion in the C division for badminton. So I really got into that a lot. And at that same time, I was working at General Motors as a welder, welding car pans together on an assembly line. And then the union kind of wanted more money, and they decided to close the plant and move it to Canada.
Oh.
So I was out of a job. So then I got a job as a bus driver, or a transit bus driver, and did that for about 4 or 5 years. And I took a class in our local college because I wanted to meet the teacher, whose name was Don Rico. And Don Rico had done Captain America and the Daredevil, not the Marvel Daredevil, but the one back in the 50s. And I wanted to meet him because, again, I'm a big comic book fan. And I took the class, and I brought my portfolio in, and it was all superhero drawings. And he comes up to me after the class and said, I work at Hanna-Barbera as a storyboard artist, and we need people who can draw superheroes because we're doing Challenge of the Super Friends with Batman and Superman, Wonder Woman. Would you be interested if I recommend you to a class that they hold at Hanna-Barbera Studios to learn some basic animation techniques? So I was just floored. Yes, of course I want to do that. And so I ended up taking the class, and after the third week, they hired me out of the class. So that's how I got into animation. I knew nothing about animation. I wouldn't have even known how to apply for the job. And I just ended up getting the job. So, and then I had to learn. I mean, I started at the bottom as an assistant animator. And like I said, not knowing what I was doing, I just picked it up and slowly learned what an in-between was and how to do cleanup and all this sort of stuff. And ended up finally getting into the animation part of it myself. And then eventually a director, 10 years later.
Okay, since you brought it up, what in the world is in between and clean up? Because the people like me have no idea. All we know is they look cool on TV, and we have no idea how it happens.
Yeah, it's same thing with me. I mean, I had no idea any of these terminology or anything like that when I first started. And I mean, really, when they hired me, I told them, I said, really, I know nothing. You don't understand. I'm loving this that you're hiring me, but I don't know what I'm doing. I was in class for 3 weeks. I did like one in between, and it was terrible. Well, what it is the animator, he draws in a light blue pencil because it is eventually Xeroxed onto a cell. And any of the sketch lines that you do with the blue pencil doesn't get picked up by Xerox. That's why I have that non-photo blue.
Okay.
So that way, the guy who cleans the drawing up is the guy that goes in with the black pencil or the regular leaded pencil and puts in the perfect line and makes sure that everything's, the right size. If the character doesn't look quite on model, you have a model sheet that shows you what the character should look like, so you can fix that and make it look more on model, because the animator is in charge of what the motion is like. And the assistant is kind of the one that cleans it all up and does the in-betweens, where if you have a drawing here and another one like this, the one in between would be half closed like that. So
Mm.
that way, as it goes, that completes the motion. And you might have like 5 or 6 in-betweens between each key drawing. And that's what we would have to do according to a little chart that the animator would put to show where the in-between is in that section, how close it is to the other drawings. And
Yeah.
you literally draw a line right in between. I mean, it's like if the guy's head's here and the other head's here, you have to get right in between it. And then when you flip the pages, if you did it right, it looks real smooth.
Mm.
If you flip the pages and it isn't quite right, you'll see the line wiggle back and forth instead of being this nice, cohesive, smooth movement.
Okay.
And so the assistant, really, it's their drawing that you see on the screen, but it's the animator's uh, ability to make the thing move realistically that they don't make him clean everything up, because he could have done it too, but they don't want to waste his talent of making things move on doing something that's an assistant can do, because the assistant can't do the movement. You haven't learned yet how to do it.
Mm.
So it's a really good system. There's different steps all the way along the line, and each guy has his own job. And if everybody does their job just right, you end up with a really good TV series.
Now, since you're doing the animation, you're saying there's the primary artist and you're the in between. Is it difficult to try to match the artwork of someone who's not you?
Not. It's really, when you're an artist, you can kind of um, adapt your style to somebody else's style. Because, see, for me, my style was more superheroes.
Mm.
So, I mean, I could do He-Man, I could do Skeletor, I could do the superheroes, Thundar. When I had to do Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or something that wasn't anatomically correct,
Mm.
that's where I had more difficulty, because I didn't have that natural, real cartoony flair,
Mm.
and I had to learn that. And when you've got an animator that's really good at it, and you've got a key over here and a key over here, and they're both drawn so perfectly well, it's a lot easier to follow and do those in-betweens and make them look pretty good based on what you're working to and into. And that took a little while, though, before I got comfortable being able to do that, because especially when a character is cartoony, uh, they can move different. They squash and stretch, and
Mm.
you can't squash and stretch Superman because he's made of muscle and bone.
Right, right.
It's a different thing. It's got to be more anatomically correct, and it's got to move more like a human being. A cartoon, there's no such thing as a duck that can talk. So, I mean, it can do whatever you want it to do. It can stretch, it can squash, you can hit it with a frying pan and his face turns into a frying pan. And that was really a different concept for me as a young assistant animator that I had to learn.
So when you're doing those kind of cartoons where you're basically coming up with how to, like I said, smash a duck's face with like a frying, things of that nature, are you making up the rules of what that looks like as you go? Or are they kind of telling you this is kind of how something like this should work?
Sometimes, either way, sometimes there's something, a lot of things have already been done. So your idea is just a twist on something else that the Warner Brothers cartoons did, or
Mm.
the Disney cartoons did. But every now and then you'd come up with something that was a little bit different, and then you just make it. The saying in the animation business is make it work. And as long as it works, and then you kind of take your pages and you flip the whole scene, and if it looks real smooth and it looks realistic, it's like, okay, it works. And that's kind of the final thing before you turn in your scenes, is make sure it works.
I mean, you've had such an extraordinary career. I'm going to read off some of the stuff that you've done, a small number of them, and the listeners are like, I watched that. You did Thunder the Barbarian, Super Friends, Smurfs, He-Man, She-Ra, tons and tons of other things. So, what has been the key to your longevity?
wanting to stay employed because the thing was, when I first started Hanna-Barbera, they were so big that we had 3 or 4 or 5 different shows going at the same time. So while I was working on Super Friends, I was also working on the new Fred and Barney show, which was Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble. I was also doing Godzilla, the Godzilla cartoon with Godzuki. There was something called the Shmoo. There was another thing called The Thing, which was kind of the Thing from Fantastic Four, but it wasn't Fantastic Four. It was a kid that found this ring, and he would say, "Thing ring, do your thing," and he'd turn into the Thing. I don't know why they did it that way, but so I'm doing like 4 or 5 different shows at a time, and and that's during that period that I was there. When I moved over to Ruby Spears, it was similar. I was doing Thundar, I was doing Heathcliff the Cat, I was doing Mighty Man and Plastic Man. So those are the main 4 shows we were working on then. But then when I got to Filmation in '81, especially when we started on He-Man in '82, instead of having 13 episodes for a season, which is a normal TV series that runs on Saturday, because you get 13 episodes done and then you run repeats for the next 13 weeks and then repeats again, and that's your season. With He-Man, it was going to be on Monday through Friday. So we're going to have 65 episodes instead of just 13. So doing 65 episodes in 52 weeks is more than 1 show per week. So at that point, we were so busy that we couldn't do any other series. When we did He-Man, we worked on He-Man, and that was it. When we did She-Ra, same thing, because everything we did after He-Man was all done in syndication. It was on in the afternoon after you get out of school instead of on Saturday mornings. And that includes, the Ghostbusters. We did Bravestar. These were all shows that were 65 episodes per season. And it was great for us because we no longer got laid off at the end of the season because we were just constantly working. And then you could really concentrate, like you're working on He-Man every day, you're drawing He-Man or Skeletor or one of the other characters. So you really got much more used to drawing those characters because you did it every day for like 2 years. And so that way, I think that's why a lot of the show looks so good as far as the character looking the same. It was a lot easier because you're just so used to doing it that we drew better, from having to do it so often.
Well, I'll say, growing up, massive He-Man fan. I had, the toys, I watched the shows. And if I'm gonna be honest, as an adult, I still have to watch the show if I have the toys. Because
yeah,
I don't know if back in the day you would have thought that men still 40 years later are still in there going, I still have the toys set up, I'm still watching the TV shows. But I think that just is a testament to just how great those series were. When you were doing them, did you know how big of a show that you had in front of you with He-Man?
Well, it was really hard to tell that it was going to be as big as it got. When we first started doing it, especially even the studio head, when they came to us and said we want to do this show called He-Man, everybody's like, He-Man, that's kind of a name that you call somebody that's kind of a put down. Oh, you think there's some sort of He-Man, So we didn't really realize until we got into this and we saw how many toys we're selling at Christmas. Because, we basically started on this, I would say probably in September of '82. So the toys were done. This was the first show that the toy came out and then we made a cartoon of it instead of having the cartoon and then make toys of it. So by December, we knew the toys were selling like hotcakes. I mean, every kid had the Castle Grayskull and probably most of the characters.
I did.
So it's at that point that I kind of knew that we were doing something really big. Now, did I think it would be this popular 40 years later? No. I knew we were going to have a good run for 4 or 5 years. But I mean, it's just people like you, that are just, they still have the toys set up. They just loved it. It really was such an impactful part of their life. And it's kind of like me with Spider-Man. It's like, it doesn't matter that I'm 70 years old. I love Spider-Man and always will.
Hmm.
And so it's the same sort of thing. So I understand it, definitely from a standpoint of being a fan of a show, that was a great show to be a fan of.
And I will say a lot of it has to do with, and it's a credit to you, the visuals. It's such a visually exciting looking show. The characters are so distinct. They're so much fun. I mean, just you just watching them on TV. I saw the one recently with Greymare the dragon. It's just like all
Yeah,
the
Granny.
characters, are so fantastic to look at. They all look so awesome, and that is a credit to you guys and what you've done with this animation, which is, like I said, thank you. It's incredible.
Well, and what we had going for us is that we already had toys that were already designed. So if you notice, the toys don't really look like the cartoon show because the toys were so complicated with all the doodads all over them
Mm.
that if we tried to animate that, it would have been, taken us 5 times longer to do a scene with all these things that they've got on them. So our designers had to kind of break it down. And, He-Man, his amulets and his belt had circles on them, on the toys.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can't put circles on everything. You got to, then that's, as he turns his hand, you got to make sure the circle moves exactly the same. So they said, forget the circles. We'll just put the amulet, and he's got the belt, but he doesn't have the circles on the belt. He's got the Iron Cross on his chest, but he doesn't have, there were like 3 little squares going up the gray belt of his thing that he wore on his chest.
Mm.
So that way they boiled it down to the coolest parts of the toy and yet made it easier to draw for us time-wise, because it's not, it wouldn't have been any more difficult to draw. It just would have taken so much more time to get the drawings done. And time is money. And it was already going to be an expensive show. And it was really such a breakthrough show because all of the other studios closed their doors and sent the work over to Japan, Korea, Philippines. Only Filmation kept the animation here in the United States because it was more expensive.
Mm.
So that's why you see these scenes where they played them over and over with them running, because every episode have to have 25% of reused animation.
Really?
So when they would show the dailies, if Lou saw something, Lou Scheimer, the head of the studio, if they saw something that looked really cool, they'd say, okay, mark that one. And the next time He-Man battles Beastman, make sure that he does kind of the same thing. And we'll just change the background, we'll change the angle, we'll do a close in instead of a far shot. And that way, the kids will never know that it's just reused, but it's going to save us a massive amount of money to just reshoot those same cells that are already ready and all set to go. Plus, they look so good because we really did a lot of rotoscope for the runs. So everything looked very realistic.
I'll say one of the coolest things that I have is I bought a original cell of from He-Man. The ones that there's I have one of Man at Arms and Orko, and like I said, they're so cool to look at, and they're so fantastic. When you're doing these animations, as you said, they're a toy line, and basically almost any character that shows up on the show has a chance to become a toy. Does that affect how you approach the art, knowing that someone, as we mentioned, let's say like the dragon, like Great Mercy, could be turned into a toy if it becomes popular enough, things of that nature?
Some of the toys were already designed, so we had to kind of use them. I mean, Mattel would say, okay, all right, so yeah, a lot of the toys were already made. So Mattel would tell us, we've got this new toy coming out. Let's do an episode with this guy. So our writers would get together and find out what the character was, and they'd write an episode and put him in the episode. I know that we are the ones that came up with Orko. We thought they needed some sort of a comedy thing going on, like all the cartoons do, because we're basically doing the show for like 6, 7, 8-year-olds. So that's why, even though it stands up pretty well, it's not for 46-year-olds,
Right.
and if you're watching it, it's nostalgia. It's not because you think it's so darn good. But the good thing about the kids is it taught morals at the end of every show. So the parents loved it because now their kid was watching something that gave them an idea what was going on, and then showed you this is the way you should act and this is the way you shouldn't act. And it was always the good guys that acted well and the bad guys acted bad. So we really didn't make up a whole lot of characters outside of the ones that were going to be sold for toys. Granomir, we had to still do things like dragons and some of the things that were peripheral characters that really weren't a toy, just to have stories, different stories. And I know the Granomir story, that was one that was pretty popular. And a really cool looking dragon. And we even there's an episode where the dragon that was in Black Star, which was before He-Man, Black Star used to ride on this big green dragon. And they took a lot of the scenes of the dragon flying around from Black Star and just repainted them a different color and used them in He-Man. Again, because we're trying to save money. It wasn't because we were, cheap company and didn't want to work hard. We had to compete with the Japanese that their budgets were like, a fifth of what we had. And in order to keep our business going, we had to do that. And so that, I think, was what really made this show go, was being able to do it at a low enough budget. And the kids, I don't really think caught on that we were doing the same scenes over and over and over.
I think I almost when you watch the show, like as an adult watching the show, I've seen it enough times I can now pick out the repeated moments. But it's so fantastic. I think one of the most impressive, I think most or the iconic repeated scene in every He-Man is the "I have the power" scene. Which is the one that everyone always goes to. It's the one that sticks in your memory. So were you a part of that sequence?
No, that was all done by, I think they had a group of guys that did a lot of that "I have the power" stuff at the beginning. And I didn't do the one this one either. with the punch.
Right.
And then She-Ra had one where she kicked at the screen. I mean, it was very formulaic, because once we got He-Man done, we knew that it worked so well. So there was really a natural thing to say, well, what kind of scenes are we going to do for She-Ra? And it's like, well, let's have her kick. So we should kick the screen instead of punch the screen. And so that way we didn't have to spend as much time on She-Ra figuring things out, because we already figured them out for He-Man. So it was a matter of just adapting it to fit a female instead of a male. And the thing that, because a lot of people don't know how animation works, that you could have the character run through the scene, and if it's a different background and you just move in closer, it's going to look like a different scene, because he's going to run the same. If we redrew it, we would redraw him running the same anyway. So it was just really genius to think of rotoscoping these real true bodybuilders running so that it really looks so realistic. And we have each guy, that came in from one side and then they go off the other side. Each character did the same things so they could chase each other.
Yeah.
And that was, now we don't have to do dialogue, because they're running. And so that saved money across the board too. So, it was really, and it was still a big part of the story, because they're running after the guy. And that doesn't cost us any money to do. So, it was great.
So there's another episode where Skeletor makes a whole bunch of like Skeletor minion guys. Now were they each individual drawn, or did you guys take the shot of Skeletor and kind of just do what you guys did apparently with the others and kind of like reshot them, those images?
Yeah, I would assume that they would do maybe a couple, 3 or 4 different ones, and then reproduce them make them a little bit smaller. And we used Xerox a lot. So we would Xerox the character and the whole sequence, and then you would paste it up on a piece of paper. And that way you'd have 2 or 3 layers of Skeletors, some in the distance, some closer up. And they're all basically doing the same sort of thing, but you would time it different so that this guy started running after this guy had already started running. So it really looked like they were doing this instead of just, everything doing like that. And it's just the tricks of the trade to be able to get groups of people and not make them look like it's just all the same people doing the same thing all the time, which would look pretty bad.
So, I mean, I feel like as the season went on, they had scenes, the episodes had added more and more characters to the episodes. I mean, you would see 3, I think the one, like I said, with the Skeletor Minion one, you had Moss Man show up, Mechanex in that one. You had He-Man and Cyclone. I mean, they become more complicated to make these shows as it went along because they start adding larger and larger casts to these episodes.
Well, anytime you have, more than one character, I mean, imagine you've got a scene of He-Man and the scene is 50 drawings long. Okay. That's like 3 or 4 seconds. So it's going to cost me, I'm going to have to draw 50 drawings to get He-Man to do whatever he's doing. So now you've got 50 drawings. Now you add Skeletor in that scene too, and you got another 40 drawings of him. So now you got 90 drawings to do. Then you throw in Mechanic or whatever, and maybe he's not in it for as long. He's only got 20 drawings, but now you're up to 110 drawings. So now you've just more than doubled the time the scene's going to take to make.
Yeah.
So that, sometimes would be the problem, is it would make the scene so difficult to do. It's one of the things people ask me all the time, what was the hardest thing for me to do? And it really wasn't the hardest thing for me to do, but it was doing the Smurfs, because every scene had like 8 Smurfs in it. So now if you've got, 50 drawings of a Smurf and you've got 8 Smurfs in the scene, you're at like, 400 drawings. So luckily they were easy to draw, but still it takes a lot of time because each one of them has to move different. And so you have to make sure that you have to be very cognizant of what you made the other guy do so that he doesn't duplicate that, so it doesn't look robotic, like I said before. And so anytime a scene had more than one character in it, it was always a little bit more difficult to do.
As the animation part of it, did you ever talk to the writers and say, no, this is too much, you guys, you're filling too much into the scene, you need to back off?
Yeah, that kind of wasn't my job. But before, when the storyboard is being made, whoever looks over the storyboard and the layouts would say, boy, this is going to be way too complicated a scene and way too expensive a scene for this show. So maybe tone it down a little bit, and so they'd go back to the writer and they'd rewrite that sequence. But as an animator, I just had my head down drawn, and whatever they gave me, they would correct it before it ever got to me.
So you not only did He-Man, but you moved over to She-Ra. So how did you get involved in moving over to doing She-Ra, the Princess of Power?
Well, just because they decided He-Man had gone 130 episodes and it's time to come up with something different. And they said, since this was so popular, and this is one of Filmation's things that I don't think they get enough credit for, is that, we did Fat Albert, which was one of the first cartoons with black people. We tried to do Black Star, which was before He-Man in 1981. He was going to be a black character, and the networks wouldn't let us do it. So we had to make him white, but we made him really, really tan. So then it came to the point where, okay, now there are no cartoons with a girl as the main hero.
Yeah.
Wonder Woman's in Superman and Super Friends, but they got 4 or 5 other males in there that she's got a couple scenes. It's not all about her.
Right.
So they said, let's do the first cartoon with women. And I'm sure, see, the problem is the networks, ABC, CBS, and NBC, and then eventually Fox, we used to have to deal with them all the time, and they would always nix stuff that we wanted to do. Well, now that we're doing everything syndicated like He-Man, where we basically did the entire series and then said, okay, who wants to buy this series? And that way your channel 11, your channel 13, your channel 9, they bought it instead of NBC, CBS, and ABC. And so same thing, we were making She-Ra, and it's like, okay, this is going to be an entire series. Either you buy it or you don't. We don't have to listen to the networks whether we're going to make it or not. We're going to make it. And we thought it would be a really great idea because girls watch cartoons too. And we kept it with He-Man still in it, so the guys still had a reason to watch it too, because He-Man was still in it. And of course, it was huge for the girls. I get more women coming up to me, I mean, with like tears in their eyes, that they just can't, they can't believe how great She-Ra was, and it changed their life. And, the stories that you hear from everybody. Now women have something that's like that. And it was really cool. And it was difficult for us because one of the more difficult things to do is draw a pretty woman. If you make a man and he looks ugly, well, who cares? He's kind of ugly anyway. But She-Ra couldn't look ugly. She had to look pretty in every scene. So what they did is they had like 3 assistant animators that do that cleanup that I was talking about earlier. And these 3 women were so good at drawing beautiful women that they're the 3 that did almost every face that you see of She-Ra in the cartoon. So when the in-between, a lot of times the in-betweens, when they're facing this way and they turn their head, the in-betweens don't look too good. But because it goes so fast, you only see the really pretty one and the really pretty one, and you don't see the ones in the middle. But with She-Ra, you'll notice almost every one of the cells that you could buy, she always has a pretty face. And it's because of those assistants that did that. And it made it easier for us animators, because now we didn't have to spend a lot of time doing the detail of the face. We would just kind of put a little thing where the eyes were and where the nose was, and then they would just fill in the details. But it still was just, we actually had learned so much from He-Man that a lot of people have told me they actually think that She-Ra is a better written show than He-Man, because we made all our mistakes on He-Man, and now we had honed it down to where we could do much better in She-Ra.
So one interesting about the She-Ra, especially in the toy line, is that the villains looked like they were modeled after the He-Man characters, while the She-Ra good guys looked totally different. Did that affect how the animation was done? Because there is a distinct difference in kind of like how they shape the forms of the good guys versus the more He-Man looking villains.
Well, I think part of the reason is because most of the heroes were women. And they did look like Teela. There wasn't a big difference between them and Teela. You're right, the villains and stuff all had that big bodied look. And I think Bo did too. I think he was still, kind of like right from the He-Man mold. But all of the women, they all kind of looked like they had to look feminine. So that, I think, was the biggest difference there.
Well, I will say, actually, Bo looked different than the He-Man ones. He didn't have the same kind of like big bulk shape. They made him almost like slender, I think. I never had him, but that's what I remember.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, he didn't have kind of the bow legs that the other toys had. Yeah, I guess that's right. But I think a lot of it is just that the He-Man toys were all designed early, and then all of a sudden we're going to do She-Ra, and it was easy to just adapt a lot of them back to the old look. And like I said, with the women, I mean, really, Teela was thin. It was a pretty toy, and so was Glimmer and all the characters that She-Ra had. I always liked working on Cowl, which was the little owl with the wings that could fly, and the Madame Raz and Broomstick that she rode on. And then, of course, the little character Lookie that you had to always look for in every episode.
It was such a smart show. The interesting thing is because it is geared towards women, when you were creating like the backgrounds of that nature, was this approach to that different than with He-Man to make sure everything in the background looked, I guess, prettier?
Yeah, you'd have to talk to the background department on that, but yeah, you could tell that the all of the She-Ra backgrounds are much more pinks and purples and pretty blues and pretty greens, whereas the He-Man backgrounds, the sky was really kind of like a like a maroon with blue in it, and sometimes it would be green, but it looked a lot different than the backgrounds for She-Ra. They were much softer with like almost these little puff ball, kind of like a dandelion with the little puffs on it that you blow and they fly everywhere. There was a lot of those in the background, but they were really big and very colorful as well. A lot more water, and the Crystal Palace, of course, was really beautiful instead of being just stone like Castle Grayskull. But I thought, I think it worked really well because number one, it's a different planet.
Yeah.
They're in Etheria instead of Eternia, and that way you could make everything look more feminine. Although I think Hordak would be kind of ticked off that he didn't get the roof place.
Well, you also did. You worked on He-Man and She-Ra: The Secret of the Sword, which is the film, and the film. It was fantastic. It was what was that experience like working on the film? And it did look like there was also an upgrade in the animation itself as well for that film.
Yeah, and they basically told us they were going to take a couple of episodes and kind of merge them together, and we were going to add stuff to it and to take a little bit longer and make a little bit better animation, because the reason the animation, any type of animation that you see, the difference between good animation and bad animation is time. And when you have 1 week to do an episode, you can't spend a lot of time. So they would give us like maybe 20 scenes per week, and you'd pick like maybe one that was kind of the coolest scene of the bunch that you would do a little bit better drawing on. The other ones, you just got to get them done. And you need it to work, like I said, but it doesn't have to look fantastic. But when you get that one scene that really needs a little bit more time, then you could take time on that. Well, with the Secret of the Sword, they said, take more time on these pieces that are going to fit this thing together. So we got more time to do it, which means for better animation. In fact, we did the same thing. If you've ever seen Bravestar, there's a Legend of Bravestar movie that we did, and we had like a month to get the movie done instead of a week. And so when Tex Hex is standing there, his mustache is moving, whereas in the cartoon he just stands there. And so we got a chance to do more. There's a lot of smoke and mist and stuff that's moving in the animated movie, but not in the animated TV show. And same thing with Secret of the Sword. It was just, take more time. And then the cool thing about that was, because I had never, seen my work up on the big screen. And what they did is they gave us a special screening at Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. And in fact, I think I still got it right here. Oh, are you lucky? I happen to have it right here. This is my ticket.
Oh, that's awesome.
To see that Secret of the Sword at Grauman's Chinese.
Oh, that's so cool.
And yeah, I kept all that stuff, and I happen to have it out because I'm going to give it to a real good friend of mine. But so we went to see this at the Grauman's Chinese. So everybody is in the theater is all somebody that works at Filmation. And before the show started, we're lined out in front, and these two vehicles come pulling up, and out jumps He-Man and Skeletor, and they start battling in the middle of Hollywood Boulevard. So it was a really cool big deal, downtown Hollywood, right where, Capitol Records building's right down the street. I mean, it's really kind of cool. Hollywood Bowl's right up the way. And then to get in there and watch this movie and hear the music in stereo and loud, instead of just on your TV screen and these little teeny speakers. And then to see your name on the screen that's just, gigantic. And of course, Filmation, one of the things about Lou, the head of the studio, was that he wanted to make sure that we got credit as animators and layout artists. He always said, "You're the guys that put this thing together." He says, "Yeah, I got my name up there, but when it comes time to the credits, I want to take, instead of scrolling them really fast and having like 100 people on one sheet, he broke it down to like maybe 20 people, and it would be on screen for like 5 seconds, and then the next group would come up. So you really got a chance to go through and find yourself on the screen." And we appreciated it because we were proud of what we were doing, and it was nice to be able to get some accolades from the people that are running the whole thing, that we were important to them.
Now, now going back, now we're going forward 40 years later, you do a lot of convention circuits. What has it been like to meet all these fans? And do you find that the people coming to your line are more adults like me, or they are the kids of the adults my age that they're coming for the autographs now, the new generation?
Yeah, it's mainly people, in their 40s that grew up with He-Man, especially. I mean, that's the one that, especially for guys, I mean, boy, they just love it. And, I've got a nice big huge sign of He-Man with his sword up behind me, so it says Tom Cook, animator on He-Man. And so that way, when they walk by right away, they know that I worked on the show instead of just some guy selling prints of He-Man or whatever. And if they're a good parent, their kids know He-Man because they've got the DVDs and they're showing the kids the show. Right. And they love it too. And so I get the younger kids love it. There are some parents that come up and they didn't show it to their kids yet. Maybe the kids are a little too young, but they're going to get it eventually. And those kids, they kind of know it just through osmosis because their dad talks about it all the time. But they don't really understand what they're going to see when they finally get a chance to sit down with their dad. Because I know that's what I loved doing when I was a dad, sitting down on Saturday morning and with my daughter and just sitting there watching cartoons with her. And then we really had that time of sharing. And then, of course, the dads grew up. I mean, the kids grow up a little bit. They finally get the dad's toys to play with. And, if they didn't collect them, and have them still in the boxes, but they'll let the kids play with them. And women, same thing. But the main thing is, since I worked on Scooby-Doo, that's the one that's like the biggest thing because every kid knows that no matter how old you are. And of course, I was in high school. Now, like I said, I'm 70 years old right now. I was in high school when Scooby-Doo came out. So that's how old Scooby-Doo is. It's like over 50 years old. And so everybody knows Scooby-Doo with all these live action movies. It was hard to miss it. So that's probably the biggest thing that I did. That's the biggest seller, just because I have the massive numbers of people that love it so much. But He-Man's right there with it. I mean, because the people, and plus the people that love He-Man, they're looking for collectible stuff that might be a little more expensive. The kids can't afford it. They can't afford something like that. But the dads can come in and get that rare He-Man pop or whatever that is hard to find, and then I can autograph it for them, and it gives them extra, especially since they can look at their screen and say, "Hey, there's Tom Cook's name on the screen, and look at here, I've got his pop right here."
Yeah.
So, and it's very humbling because, and I say this all the time, anytime I do an interview, this sort of thing comes up all the time, but it's very humbling because I can't believe how much people still love this stuff. But the thing that is so real is that I still love this stuff. So I understand why they want to get my autograph. It's just weird that it's me that they want the autograph. But when I was a kid, if I got to meet some animators, I would want their autograph. The same thing. And I would look up to them just like I did Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko, who kind of look at you and go, "All I did was draw comic books, kid. I'm not a hero."
Yeah.
but you are to me. And it's the same thing with me. I was so fortunate to be able to sit there in that room with my couple of buddies that we're still friends to this day and draw He-Man, and knowing that I'm impacting their lives just like Spider-Man impacted my life. So it's just that's why I love doing cons so much, is
Yeah.
because it's just nice to be able to give the person that really wants to meet me the chance to meet me.
Mm.
And it doesn't have to be me, it could be anybody that worked on the show. I'm not saying just me, but me being the representative of He-Man, I take that very seriously, and I make sure that I give them a good experience, that they're going to talk about, about wow, he was so great too, and He-Man was so good. So, I don't want to destroy the mystique.
Well, like I said, I agree completely. Like I said, that animation still is one of the pride possessions that I have. It's in a frame on my wall. I put up on my. I have an autograph wall. I put on my autograph wall. It's like I said, it's Man at Arms. It's so cool. And I think another thing that's been cool is like in the recent last few years, He-Man has had also another massive resurgence. You've had two shows on Netflix, two different shows on Netflix. You've had two documentaries on He-Man, The Toys That Made
Yeah.
Us, and then I can't remember the name of the other documentary. So, well, what is that like for you to just know that He-Man is suddenly had this massive resurgence of popularity just in the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, well, the documentaries for sure, made a big deal, because everybody comes up and says, "Did you watch those?" And even the one, I think it was just called, man, Masters of the Universe or something. It was just about He-Man, though. It was basically about the toys and how it came to be. And that one, watching that, I mean, I learned a lot, even though I was at the studio. There's a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I didn't realize, like the fact that they weren't going to even do a cartoon series. They were just going to put those comic books in there. And then the guy said, well, the kids, they can't read the comic books.
Mm.
And the guy completely lies to him and says, oh, we're going to do an hour and a half special animated feature. It's a complete lie. And then he comes to Filmation and says, can we do a feature of He-Man? And Lou said to him, well, why don't we do a whole series? And that's how we ended up doing the series. So if he didn't lie to Mattel or whoever made the toys, the series never would have happened. So it's stuff like that that I learned in that one. But any one of those things really does a good job of explaining kind of how things were back then for the person like you who's really interested in this kind of stuff, like I am too. It's like some people watch the show and that's it, but most people that like He-Man, they really like the whole folklore of how it got started, and they really take it to that extra step. And which for me, when they do these remakes of it, that's what's one of the mistakes they make. They change it.
Mm.
Stop changing it. You can make it exactly like the old show, but just write it for a little bit older crowd now, since you're no longer 6 years old.
Mm.
But keep the characters the same, keep Orko the same, keep the comedy the same, just update it. But they keep changing it too much, and they start making the problems of Earth that we have today the problems of Eternia. And it's like, come on, we don't need the same problems on Eternia. Just let Eternia be its own place, and maybe it's a place where racism doesn't exist. Instead of trying to bring it into it to make it so lifelike like Earth.
So, so at its core, what do you think a He-Man show must be to be a proper successor to the original? Like, what is the core of the right He-Man type show?
It's kind of like what I said. It's kind of that humor. I always felt like, and this would be the big change that I would make, is that Skeletor has got to be more menacing, because they didn't want to scare the crap out of little kids.
Mm.
So that's why they gave him the funny little voice instead of the big, deep, booming voice that you would probably think should go with Skeletor. But they said, we're going to scare these little kids to death. They're never going to watch the show, because they're not going to be able to sleep at night because Skeletor is so scary. So they had to make him funny. And so they made all of his minions funny too. And that's the first thing you do, is make them more menacing. And then that would naturally just make the battles a little bit better, and allow them to cross swords instead of just constantly shooting rays off stage and then seeing an explosion, and then you pan over to the smoking mess that has been made. So, you know, the word I'm going to use is violence, but it's not real. I don't mean violence like death or anything like that, but just more action is what they need. But He-Man has still got to be the really nice, kind guy that he is. You could still almost do the moral type of thing, but don't make it quite as obvious at the end by saying it. Just make it a little bit more about something. And we'll pick it up because we're grown-ups now. So,
all right.
Very good.
Have a fantastic night. And like I said, it's a honor. Thank you so much for making my childhood awesome.
Well, like I said, thank you so much for inviting me, because I love talking about this stuff. You know, it's kind of my whole life, so it's pretty cool.
Well, we'll have you back to talk about some more of the cartoons. We haven't even talked about all
Sounds
the movies
good.
like the Jetsons, so we got stuff to talk about.
Absolutely, no problem. Just reach out. Yeah, bye-bye.